Hello and welcome to Donkey Chats. We're so excited you're here. Thanks for joining us today. On today's chat, we have Charlene Couch, our resident equine expert, and we also have Rachel and Karneffel from the Hee-haw halfway house. We're so excited to talk to you about donkeys and donkey training and see pictures of your cute babies.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. I'm Brittany Sweeney. I am the communications manager with the Livestock Conservancy. And before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to ManaPro for sponsoring today's Donkey Chat. We appreciate you. Charlene and Rachel, do you want to introduce yourselves and then we can play their quick little commercial?
Yeah, I'm Charlene Couch. I am the senior program manager here at the Livestock Conservancy, and I am not an equine expert, but I am an enthusiast. I love horses and donkeys. With us today is Rachel Ann from the Hee-haw halfway house in Wellington, Colorado, and she has been training donkeys since 2010 and rescuing them since 2013. She's also an author, and we're going to talk to her about how donkeys think and what books she might have to recommend to you.
Yay.
Thanks for having me here. I'm really happy to be on and talking with you guys.
Thanks for being here, Rachel.
Absolutely. Well, before we get started with questions, let's just watch this quick little ManaPro video. You might see some cute donkeys. Here we go. It helps if I hit the right button. There we go.
Champions, colleagues,
roommates,
and personal trainers.
Whatever role they play,
they're an important part of our lives.
In their quiet way,
and their not so quiet way.
they keep us young.
On our feet,
on the go.
They pull us back to nature.
And push us toward the next adventure.
And as much as we count on them,
they count on us all the more.
To nurture their lives.
With the same commitment.
To protecting them.
Helping them grow.
And thrive.
Treating them.
As well as they treat us. By giving them a little more of our lives.
Because no matter what role they play,
out here
or in here,
we're here to make their lives the best they can be.
ManaPro, nurturing life.
Awesome. Welcome back, and thank you again to ManaPro. We appreciate you. And if anybody has questions today for any of us or for Rachel, go ahead and leave us a Facebook comment, and we will try to get to it after we talk a little bit.
All right. Rachel Ann, do you want to just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got drawn into working with donkeys?
Yeah, so basically I've been a horsewoman my whole life. Grew up riding hunter jumper in Virginia, actually, and could not have ever seen myself being a donkey person. I was always really into let's go very, very fast with horses over very tall objects. And at one point, I ended up with a horse that I really needed a companion for. And so I asked around to find a donkey. And I ended up being given a donkey by a couple that had been trying to use him as a livestock guardian. And I've come to know since that donkeys as livestock guardians generally don't work out. And so he had actually picked up a goat by the neck and swung it around orca style. He became my very best riding companion because he grew and grew and grew. It turned out he was part mammoth. And so I trained him to ride. And I realized that in training him, the donkeys were amazing. They were just phenomenal animals that I really got along with much better than horses. And so I started getting this reputation where I lived down in southwestern Colorado for training long ears, specifically donkeys, and I just kept on doing it. And then people started giving me donkeys that they couldn't handle, and that's how I got into rescue. So he ended up being, a phenomenal riding, packing, and driving donkey. He was a 3-bell donkey before he passed away. And so that's how I got into it. And once I had one, of course, they're like potato chips. You can't just have one. You're going to have more. and now I have quite a few of a collection here. But my whole purpose in rescuing animals and in training them is for others and making sure that they get to the best homes they can. So.
Yeah, I appreciated I think it was on your website, your mission statement, that your personal mission is to improve the welfare of donkeys and humans.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us how you put those two things together.
Right. So I'm actually also a therapeutic horseback riding instructor, and I have been I'm a PATH CTRI, and I also work with a specialty in equine specialist mental health and learning. So my main job, aside from all of these other things I do, is I actually run and direct a adaptive riding program here in Fort Collins, which is the town next door. And I work specifically mostly with at-risk youth. That's my specialty. And so when I come to, working with animals, whether it's in rescue training, my thought is always, how are they going to match with a human? What's the chemistry going to be like between the human and the animal? What do they have to teach us? And how can I make it so that whichever human ends up with this animal or animals, how am I going to make that relationship work? Because there's no point in adopting out an animal that doesn't get along, and that the people get frustrated with. That's not my purpose. And not that can't happen, things happen. Sometimes things don't work out, but I try to make sure that whichever animals come through my rescue and through my training programs, that they're set for life, that they have the education necessary to get along with people, but also that the people who come to look at them and potentially adopt them get the time with them that they need to understand what they're going to need, what tools they need to work with them. Because otherwise there's no point. I don't want to send people into a situation that doesn't work, or that's not good for the donkey either. And so for me, it's very twofold. There's a lot of animal people out there that are really good with the animals, a lot of trainers that are really good with horses or donkeys, mules, but don't really get along with people very well and don't seem to really connect the two. And it's a two-way street. Everybody's got to be happy. So that's where I bring everything in, is that, my job and what I do for a living is a lot of connection work between equines and people. And I want to bring that out in the rescue work as well. So.
Wow, I love that. I think a lot of what animal training is about is human training. It's, it's teaching us how to communicate and how to be respectful and to ask in the right way. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
So the other part of this, of course, and we'll get to this later, I'm sure, is I've been writing books on training and selling them. Well, the first one internationally now, nationally and internationally. And I'm working on a second that I think is going to be even more topical for more people. The first one was pretty limited in scope in terms of the type of people who would potentially benefit from it. And the second one, I think, will encompass it's a topic that will help a lot more people. And so I'm trying to get word out there because there just isn't a lot of information about working with donkeys and donkey psychology, behavior, facial expressions, and what kind of a person you need to be around them in order to succeed. And so for me, making that connection through literature and writing is becoming very important, because I'm seeing that there's a really big need for it. There's a void that needs to be filled. So I'm really, really happy to be working on those things. And mostly it was because I was getting so many questions online, and I just got tired of writing out answers to a bazillion people. So I'm like, okay, I'll just write a book on it. I'll write a book on it. So that way I can say, here's the book. So that's the other part of the animal-human connection that I'm trying to make.
Yeah. Well, that's really wonderful. I know the book you're working on right now is it Starting the Donkey from Scratch?
Yeah, and I have the prototype here. So the cover won't exactly look like this. Okay, that way. So this is my very first edition, basically. This is my rough draft. So so I'm working through it, but this is basically what it's going to look like. And in this book is quite a bit of information about, I mean, everything from how do you catch your donkey to how do you, pick up their feet? How do you lead them? How do you tie them? How do you get them in a trailer? So it's got all the basics. That's the one I'm working on. And then the one that I have sold quite a few copies of is, let's see if we can see it, is Starting the Saddle Donkey. And this one actually sold really well, despite it being a very limited topic. So in order to buy this or want to buy this book, you probably would want to be riding your donkey. However, it has a lot of the groundwork necessary to do things like driving or packing. So so I think it's topical for more people in that way.
Yeah. I think that what you're doing is it's addressing a couple of issues, and one is husbandry and welfare. Because if you can't pick a donkey's feet up, then it doesn't get good foot care and hoof care, and that leads to to discomfort and illness. And I had another thought in my mind, but I just lost it. I'm sorry. I guess the other is how to make donkeys, and sort of the way that they think and process and learn. How to make that accessible to people, because I do feel like a lot of donkeys get in trouble because people don't understand how they think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one of the big things that I've worked on, and I used to train locally, so I travel and train. I've taken on a few board and trains, but mostly traveling and training and working with humans and their donkeys. And the reason why I've done that as opposed to board and train is that donkeys think really differently than horses. And actually, I tend to have a little more success with people who've never worked with horses than people who have. Occasionally, people who do have, one of the things they'll have is potentially really good timing, which is important in training. But actually, I've actually found that the dog trainers tend to be better. But just anecdotally, one of the things that I've noticed is that with donkeys, they don't generalize very well. So horses, you can teach them something, and generally if somebody else does something similar, they will probably react in a fairly similar fashion. Donkeys don't. So the way that I ask for something is going to be different no matter what, no matter how hard you try to copy my energy, my style, my movements. What I ask and the way I ask it is going to be different than the way you ask it. And donkeys are very specific in their thinking. So if you try to ask the donkey to do exactly the same thing I did, and you think you're asking them the same way, you're not. So they may not respond to you at all. They might just be confused. And this is something that is really tough for a lot of people to understand. And so what I like to do is involve the owners or the potential owners in the training. It's so important because I can teach the donkey a skill, I can teach the owners a skill, and then I can teach them together. Mm-hmm. That's really the best way they're going to learn. And this has been true throughout my entire experience with donkeys, that they think in a way that, one thing is not like another. And teaching a donkey to generalize from one person to another is a skill in and of itself to train them to do. So you can, I have a donkey right now that works as an adaptive riding donkey, and all sorts of people ride her successfully. But she had to be trained so that all sorts of people could ride her successfully, if that makes sense. So, so some of the donkeys that I've trained to ride, I've realized if I don't train them with other people early on in the process, they're only going to ride well with me until they really learn that. The other thing about donkeys is they're really contractual. I've talked a lot about this in my first book, that donkeys make excellent lawyers. And the reason I say that is because they'll make a contract with you. And you better make sure your first contract with them is really solid, because trying to rewrite it is a lengthy, expensive, painful process. They're probably going to win the litigation. And unless you've really got good negotiating skills, you're going to be in trouble. But also, not only are they litigious, but they also require remuneration. So they're very transactional in their quality. Sorry if you all are lawyers. Anyway, but they do. So if there isn't something that's in it for them, why would they do it? A horse you can startle and they'll run around a round pen, and you can reward them with a release of pressure, which you can do with donkeys as well. But as you start working with them, that release of pressure may not really do it. And so you'll find that a lot of donkey trainers do use rewards and a schedule of rewards that then gets decreased over time in order to shape behaviors. And I found that that's really important, especially for things like hoof lifting and getting in the trailer, anything safety wise. That's going to be a really important thing to use, because if there isn't anything in it for them, they're not real interested. What you have to offer them has to be more exciting and better than hanging out with their friends and just being a donkey. So that's how they work. You can't intimidate a donkey into doing things, and you really shouldn't try. So that's one of the ways in which I feel like donkeys are a little different, and learning how to reward on a specific schedule in order to get the behaviors that you want, while also not being treated like a human Pez dispenser, is important as well. So you don't want them to just think that you're something to eat, and get so distracted by the food that that's all they can think about. So it does take a little bit of practice. So do you use something like clicker training with the donkeys? You can. I don't generally use clicker training. I'll use cue words. So for instance, if I want a donkey to pick up their feet, I will pair a cue word up and point at the foot with my finger. There's my finger. And lean over, point at the foot, say up in a specific tone of voice. And when I get the behavior that I want, the treat goes in the mouth immediately. It's paired immediately. It doesn't happen after. It's while it's happening with my voice cue. So the donkeys that I've trained to pick up their feet, that I've spent some time with and able to spend some time with, I can walk up to them, point at a foot, say up, and they'll put it in my hand. And so that's what I want out of the animals that come through my program. So trying to get them used to certain words, they can learn quite a few words, and really it's not about the word you use, it's about the tone of voice and how it sounds to them, because obviously they don't understand English. And so I've told people, like, oh, well, do I have to use that word? I said, no. If you say it in exactly the same tone I do with the same inflection, you could say sup, and they'll probably pick up their foot, or carrot, and they'll probably pick up their foot, right? So it's just whatever works, you can use. You can put that button on your donkey, basically.
Yeah, well, it does sound a lot like dog training to me.
It does. Yeah, it's very similar.
Yeah, that's really neat. So I guess maybe back up just a little, and in a more general sense, can you talk about the husbandry of donkeys, and maybe what are the top 5 things that people really need to know and think about before they ever bring a donkey home?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say that one of the top subjects that I tend to talk about is diet. Is very important. I'd say that probably 95% of the rescues I get in here are overweight, and some significantly overweight. And the problem with an overweight donkey is that once they get those fat pads along their back and the crusty neck that flops over, once they get to that point, it's very hard to reduce the weight without causing harm. So you can over time, but they're really prone to having health issues as you diet them. And some of those health issues can be fatal, where the fats, the lipids actually go into the bloodstream and kill the animal on your diet. And so dieting them properly is really important, but also not putting them in a situation where you're going to need to diet them. So all equines are meant to eat all day long and move all day long. When we put them into captivity, that's not the case, right? So we're feeding meals that aren't all day long, little bits all day long, and we're feeding usually too rich of meals, because donkeys are desert animals and they're built to have very thrifty digestive systems. So they use a lot more nutrients than a horse does. And so what donkeys need is not a horse diet, not a cow diet, not a sheep diet, not a goat diet. What they need is a donkey diet. And that donkey diet needs to be low sugar, low carb hay in 1.5% of their ideal body weight per day, fed over as many meals as possible. There are places in the US where you can put a donkey out to pasture. Here, you absolutely can't for the most part, depending on the time of year. But the sugars in our grass, even when it's brown, are so high. So what I see are a lot of donkeys that are super overweight. So that's number one. Number two is hoof care is really important. So handling hooves is a very big topic for me. I'd say every single donkey that comes here, I need to get underneath them and deal with a kicking wild mess. And so I do a lot of my own farrier work for that reason, so that I can get them used to those tools before they go out into the big wide world. And so that the farriers that I do use will actually come back, not dislike me. And so I do a lot of work on picking up feet. And that's something that I talk about in this book that I have coming out in November, is how do you do that? Because that's really important to do your hoof lifting training in a way that makes sense to the donkey and is safe for you and the donkey, because it can be extremely unsafe when an animal doesn't want you near their weapons and their means of escape, which are their hooves. So that's number two is hoof issues, that people just don't handle them, especially as babies. I mean, come on, do it when they're babies and when they're little. But that's my little soapbox moment there. But yeah, so how do you handle them when they won't let you anywhere near their feet? That's something that I talk about in my second book that's coming out, because that's really important topic. So hoof care, behaviors. So donkeys have different behaviors than a horse. They have different behaviors than all other livestock. And so they're different species, and knowing how to read their behaviors, their facial expressions, and what their different behaviors mean, so that you can properly care for them and know if an animal is colicking or sick or happy or upset, like knowing what different body behaviors mean is really important as well. And then I'd say that, people really getting out of a mindset, this is my last one. So getting out of a mindset of anthropomorphizing them and understanding, and I feel like this is important for all animals, understanding that there's no way we can get in their heads. There's just simply no way. We can read their behaviors and we can extrapolate from that, but there's not a single human on earth that knows exactly what a donkey is thinking. So understanding that you don't know before you go into the situation, and coming in with that humble attitude of, what can you teach me today? Mm-hmm. Instead of, what can I teach you today? It has to be mutual. And I've noticed that donkeys that are treated that way tend to give a lot more. So observing their behavior and really trying to be open-minded about what they might be telling you, and not assuming you know. Right.
Honor that contract. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this just piqued my curiosity. Some of the behaviors. How can you give an example of what donkeys might do that would be different than a horse in the same circumstances?
Yeah. So one of the things that I see a lot of with new donkey owners, and I'm on a lot of these Facebook forums, and people get a new donkey and they go, this donkey is chasing me with his ears back. That's one of the things that is really interesting, because donkeys naturally follow behind, and push others ahead of them. And so there's actually kind of a fine line there with the ears back and following. So it's playful, right? So if a horse lays its ears back and snakes its neck out and comes after you, you're in trouble. You better get big quick, or go through a fence or something, and change that behavior. With donkeys, they naturally follow with their ears back anyway, and their ears are huge, so it looks like they're a lot further down than they are.
Oh yeah.
So ears back doesn't necessarily mean upset or mad. Now they can do the ears back, and then there's ears back, right? Like really back. And then neck comes down, nose snakes out, and head shaking. That's a start of like, oh, I'm getting a little more energy and playful. And that can turn into more aggressive behavior potentially. But if you say your donkey is coming at you with their ears back and they're just like a little like sweet and coming up to you and wanting attention, they're just getting their ears out of the way for some love, right? Like, come on in here, love me. And it can be playful, and you'll see them following each other like that. And then the play can escalate into something a lot more intense, which the donkeys still can regard as play, but wouldn't be for us, right? We don't want to be bitten and chased and, pawed at, that kind of thing. So knowing the energy level really changes what that behavior is. Ears back doesn't always mean the same thing. So that's one of the things. Another thing that donkeys do specifically is I call it a donkey cuss. I won't cuss on here, I promise. But when you watch them and if they're irritated by something or frustrated by something, say they're pacing a fence line because they really want to get in with another donkey, or there's food on the other side, or they've been tied up and they're like, I don't know, I'm stuck. Do you notice I'm stuck to this fence? This is awful. You'll see them pin their ears back, put their head up real quick, and switch their tail with their tail. That's a donkey cuss. Sometimes if you leave the situation, it'll turn into switching tail, donkey cuss, and kick out. That's a bigger cuss word, more intense cuss word. So that's something that donkeys do that you don't necessarily, horses will switch their tail in annoyance, but it's a little different in terms of how they use it. So those are two things. There's more, but there's two things. Another thing to think about, this is more on the husbandry side, is that a donkey that is just a little low, like they're maybe still eating, but not as fast, or just you think they feel like just a little off, that can be the same as a horse rolling in colic, throwing themselves on the ground. So with disease progression, especially things like colics that can happen kind of quickly out of nowhere, it seems, with those sorts of situations, by the time a donkey is showing the symptoms that a horse would, to the level that a horse would, they are at the point of you might have to put them down. So thinking about, they're very stoic animals. They are, it's in their nature to hide being in pain. So it's really important to watch and observe and see what's normal for your donkey, because if you don't know what's normal for your donkey, you can miss some pretty big signs.
Yeah, I've heard other donkey owners and breeders talk about how stoic they are, and a foal will be frisking around, and then in a few hours it's flat out on the ground, or a huge abscess shows up in a foot that the donkey's not even showing lameness. So that's an amazing difference. Is that sort of a survival mechanism so that you don't get culled out of the wild by the wolves, or is that what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what's going on. And, they're all individuals just like us. So some of them will be a little bit more touchy, and you'll be able to see. I have one donkey that likes to colic when the weather changes to get really cold. And I just know this about her. So I prepare her. I give her probiotics before it. Like I kind of prepare her. I'll pull her favorite water bucket inside, where if she's standing inside out of the weather, like I'll do some things because I know she gets kind of dramatic about it. Like I'll know. I've had others where it's like, gosh, they're like eating slowly. I better call the vet. Like that's where I really feel like that's a big sign. So thinking about really observing your herd and taking the time to watch. Don't just throw feed. Watch how they eat. Watch the motion of their jaw. Watch the energy with which they anticipate the food. Watch how they move. What's normal for them, right? And so really being able to see things before something worse happens can mean the difference between life and death, or, you giving a little bit of Banamine and some probiotics versus having a $400 vet bill, so knowing your herd and knowing your animals is super important. Absolutely.
Yeah, that is true. Knowing what's normal is the only way you know what's not. So you really do have to watch. So you mentioned your donkey in a stall just a few minutes ago. Is the infrastructure needed for a donkey similar to what's needed for a horse?
It is similar. And when I say stall, I mean, it's actually a run into my barn. So I never put my donkeys in stalls. I found that donkeys don't do fantastic in stalls. You can stall them, but they tend to get frustrated. Just like horses do. I'm just not a fan of stalls to begin with, but that's a different soapbox. But I do have runs into my barn. So donkeys do need shelter, at least a 3-sided shelter to get out of the wind and rain and wet snow. They don't have a waterproofing mechanism on their coat like a horse, so they don't have the oils that come to the top that slick off water. Their fur is pretty uniform throughout, which is why it's a little bit more bristly, right? And it just feels different. And that's a desert adaptation. So when we take them out of that environment and we bring them somewhere that has more water, you're going to end up with issues. So one of the things that I see are fungal issues on donkeys because water tends to get trapped under the fur. And then if they get warm, so this would be more of like a summertime issue or a springtime issue, you'll get the fungus among us. And I've had a few donkeys that are more prone to that than others. And I just know they're going to get it. I have stuff on hand. I try to nip it in the bud. But not all donkeys are really prone to that. Abscessing in hooves is something that happens a lot in wet environments. So having some place to get up out of the wet is really important. And doing that like hoof picking routine when it's really wet out and muddy out can be important too. I like to use Artemud in my donkey's hooves actually to pack in there if it's really nasty out to try to protect their hooves so that I don't get abscesses. But a big part of that is also really good hoof care so that the tighter the hoof is trimmed and the better the hoof is without separation on the hoof wall, the better your hooves are going to be and the less likely you are to get abscessing. And then, donkeys can get really cold quickly when it's wet. So, if it's cold enough out that the snow can lay on top of their coat, that's fine. If it's not melting on their coat, they're probably fine. But oftentimes, especially here in Colorado, we'll get these like freak storms that it starts out 60 degrees and then it's 20 and snowing, slushing sideways. And I've actually had donkeys that have come out and they're almost frozen to the ground. I mean, it happens so quick. So having really good shelter, and that was with good shelter. She just laid down and happened to have a storm right then. And she woke up and went, oh, I can't get up. So we get really extreme weather here. So, having really good shelter, having a blanket for your donkey if they need it to help keep them dry in that wet, that 40 degrees and slushing is just the worst for them, honestly. I do see that they tend to shiver more that when a horse wouldn't be, just because if they get a little wet, it goes straight down into their skin and freezes on their skin. So that shelter is really important. Having really good fencing, just like a horse, is really important. They're really good at undoing latches. So having maybe 2 latches on your gates can be important depending on whether yours are escape artists like mine or not. And having high enough fencing that is just safe for them. They're not as accident prone, I'd say, just in general as horses. They don't tend to just do things and end up, stuck. Yeah. If they do get stuck, they tend to stand there and wait for help. But that being said, having really good fencing that is safe is important as well. And if that involves putting up a strand of hot wire so they don't touch your fence, that's totally okay. All of mine have gotten used to hot wire fencing on occasion, depending on where they're at on my property and if I'm moving them around. So they're pretty good at understanding that as well.
Yeah. Wow. Brittany, do you want to skip over and see if we have any questions right quick? And then I've got a few more questions for Rachel.
Yeah. So if anybody has questions, feel free to write a comment on our Facebook page and let us know. Let's see. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Kevin says the books sound really practical and helpful.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. Hi, Patrick. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Patrick says, hello. Thank you for sharing and speaking today. I will definitely check out your book. We have a 14-year-old Janet that was severely mistreated by a previous owner. This manifests in extremely aggressive, dangerous behavior when caught, biting and kicking. She requires intravenous tranquilization for any farrier work She trusts me, but not when we have to work with her. I'm at a bit of a loss on how to begin with her.
That's a great question, Patrick. And I think I'm friends with you on Facebook. I recognize your face. So that's a question that requires, it would require a little bit more explanation than what I can go into here. However, what I would say is slow it down. Whatever you're doing with her, slow it down even more than that. Now take what you're doing and slow it down even more than that. So when you end up with an animal that's so afraid that they're fearing for their life, so they're aggressive, the very first thing to do is to take it slower. So when and I'm not sure when you say she trusts you, what exactly that means in your world, or what she's allowing you to do with her. But I wouldn't try asking her to generalize to other people just yet. And obviously with the farrier, you'll have to, just for getting things done. That's totally fine. And actually I talk about that in my next book, that using some sort of medical restraint can be really useful when you first start working with hooves. And so I won't even go into that, because I think what you're doing is probably fine with that at this point, with the thought that that needs to eventually change and not have to happen over time. But when it comes to working with a biter kicker, having the ability to be in a space where the animal feels free to move away and you can move away from them. Okay, so you can take the pressure off whenever you feel like you need to, is going to be really important. So I in my second book, I talk a lot about putting pressure on and releasing it using your spacing. That's going to draw your donkey in towards you and have them be curious with you and be in a more curious frame of mind when working with them. Working with some sort of reward that she really enjoys. And if that reward is that you leave her alone and you back away, that might be the reward you need right now, as opposed to if she's a biter, putting your hands near her face, right? And so having a pen, I'd say having a pen that's a really good size to work with her, where she can't leave, but you can move out of her space and be at a safe place, and then come into her space, touch her in a way that you need to, or work with her in a way you need to. When she responds in a way that you like, move away from her immediately. Give her space. Come back into her space. So approach retreat with a donkey like that is going to be really big. And if you ever want to contact me on Facebook, we can chat more about it, because I do think I'm friends with you on Facebook. But I'd be happy to chat with you more about her. But that would be my suggestion, is slow it down, start with approach retreat, start with having a safe place to work with her, and go way, way back to the basics with her.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick is a breeder of endangered Poitou donkeys, and he has I think the biggest herd in the U.S. So that's a lot of animals to deal with. So anything you can offer him, we would appreciate, and I know he would. He's wonderful.
I'd be happy to chat. And Patrick, if you ever want to contact me on Facebook, I'd be happy to chat with you. And I love all your pictures. You have some amazing donkeys. I'm always like, oh, what is he posting next? So,
Rachel, you've worked with some endangered breeds yourself, right? The miniature donkeys.
So I do have some miniatures, and I've worked with quite a few mammoth jackstock as well. Mm-hmm. The minis, I guess I don't. Are they endangered? I'm not entirely sure on that one, but I do know that the mammoths are. And people are always asking me, like, where can I find a trained mammoth donkey? And it is hard. There aren't that many good quality mammoth donkey breeders out there. The ones that are out there and are doing good ethical work, amazing people. But they are hard to get pregnant. They're hard to, conceive, to get to term. It's hard to get them. What I've heard is that it's kind of hard to get mothers to accept babies, is what I've heard in my world. And I don't know a ton about breeding, but it does sound like it's a lot of work to try to preserve that breed. In fact, I actually have one of the genets that I trained to ride, drive, and pack is now up at West Elk Equine, making babies for them, because I'm not, as a rescue, right, I'm not big on breeding animals, but at the same time, I see this need for really good quality mammoths. And I looked at her and she's like the most conformationally correct animal, just gorgeous, great brain, obviously could be trained for all these things. Was like kid broke on the trail, just amazing animal. And I said, she needs to pass on her genetics. So I'm so glad they bought her from me, and they're breeding her. And she had a beautiful Jack foal this year that's under contract. But yeah, so I tend to work with quite a few mammoth jack stock when I can get them in. I have 2 at my property right now, one of which is my personal donkey, Atlas. And then I have what I call a sanctuary donkey. His name's Shofar. He's enormous, gorgeous, but he is a bolter under saddle. And so he had some pretty rough training in his very beginning. And then another trainer worked with him at a different rescue and did some really good work with him. And now he's here. And so he's one that I'm hoping eventually to adopt out to just the right family or person that understands to take it really slow with him. But he's been incredible. And he actually, the other day was the very first day he laid down, and I was able to actually lie on top of him and touch him all over and sit on him. And he's never let me do that before. So he has the potential to have that trust. But it's taken a lot of work and a lot of time on my part. So I'm really hoping someday he's going to find just the right person.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. Yeah, it's an important piece in conservation. If people aren't able to handle the donkeys or, use them effectively or breed them and find good buyers, then, that becomes a conservation issue. That's lose animals that way. And so the better we can treat these animals and like you're doing, Rachel, to teach people to treat these animals is going to be crucial.
Yes. And mammoth jackstock has become, so people are really wanting riding donkeys for multiple reasons, but one of them being that they tend to be, they're thinkers, right? So they can spook and they can run, right? But they don't tend to do so in the way that a horse does. They tend to think a little bit first and give you a little more time to react. And a lot of times a donkey spook is simply to sull up and balk and stop their feet. And so that's really attractive to a lot of people who just want to enjoy nature with the donkey and not worry about, is my animal going to jump out from underneath me? But they're also narrow-bodied naturally, and they have a lot more front to back than side-to-side movement. So for somebody who has hip issues or back issues or knee issues, they tend to be more comfortable to ride. They've got pretty smooth gaits. And so they're becoming very popular, and a lot of people want them, and there just aren't that many out there. And so that's why it was really important for me to write a book on training saddle donkeys, because people will get them and they don't know what to do with them. They want one, but they don't know anyone who trains them. And oftentimes horse trainers don't really know what to do with them and might make mistakes that show up later as problem behaviors. They're just behaviors, but for us, a problem. And so I think it's really important to put the education out there, since they're becoming more popular too. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, the education should be in front of as many people as possible, I think.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So how can folks get in touch with you? I know that you are writing books in order not to have to, have 1,000 emails with the same training questions, but how can people get in touch with you and learn more about donkey training, and what's the best way?
So there's 2 different ways. One would be to go to my website, so hee-haw.com. And there is like a little spot where you can send me an email. And please write in actually what you want to know a little bit, because I get a couple of emails a week, it seems. So please contact me. Well, I don't know what about. So write in just a little bit about yourself and your situation, please. But also, if you go on to my Facebook page, so Hee-haw Halfway House Donkey Rescue and Education is my business page on Facebook, and you can always send me a message through there as well. The way to get my books will be through the heehawhalfwayhouse.com webpage. I'll be putting up more instructions on how to get the second book here soon. It should be released in November, and that's the one on starting donkeys from scratch. You get in a donkey, you don't know what to do with it, can't get near it, can't get near its feet, can't catch it, can't get it in a trailer, whatever it is, that's going to be in that book. And so it'll be a pretty topical book for a lot of people, but that's also where you can find my first book on training saddle donkeys. And you can only buy them through me. So you do have to go through that. I don't have them on any other platforms. I'm self-publishing. It's a lot of work, and I feel like I need to clone myself. but that way I kind of have control over the quality and marketing and communications, everything. But yeah, either of those places is a really good way to get in contact with me. And I'm always happy to answer training questions. It's just that I prefer to send out that information in any way I can. And then if you have questions, come to me. And that way I'm not overwhelmed with questions, but I do get back to everybody who contacts me. So I try to take the time for all of that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Do you do any video training or, any of that sort of education for folks?
I haven't so far, and the reason is actually because, well, as you saw earlier, I don't have good reception in my barn.
Right.
But also here in northern Colorado, basically someone always leaves the door open to Wyoming, and we end up with pretty hellacious wind, like 60 mile per hour wind, like most of the year. And so any sort of training videos I do, all you'd hear is shh. Even if I wear a headset, it would just be shh, and then me sniffling because of the pollen. So I haven't done that yet. If I had a good facility to do that in, I probably would. But right now it would be really tough to hear or see what's going on through the wind and the crazy, all the tumbleweeds flying by. And I'm out there every day working in it. So, I do it. But when I do videos of myself for the pictures that I take for my books, so I video short snippets of training, and then I take stills, and then I edit them and put them in my books for the educational purpose of seeing the step-by-step. When I do that and I listen to the videos, all you hear is me sniffling and the wind blowing. So it really wouldn't be super effective, I don't think. I know there are trainers who do that, who live in parts of the world that aren't, super blowy, but here we have some pretty extreme weather. So I haven't done that yet. If I get a chance to work in a facility where it's quiet enough for me to do it, I definitely would. But if anybody wants to step up and be my videographer and do it in a nice facility, I'd be happy to.
There you go. That'd be a great way to let people actually see the process. I guess you could caption your videos.
That's true. That's true. It would be sniff, sniff. Hey, don't do that. Sniff, sniff. Wait, no, don't touch me there. Sniff.
All right. Well, I guess this will be my last question. If you could get one single message out to the public and to donkey owners and to potential donkey owners, what would that be?
That's a really great one. Great question. So my one thing that I would say is please research from reputable resources before you adopt or buy. And a reputable resource is not sorry to any person who's an 80-year-old next door neighbor, but not your 80-year-old next door neighbor who's had 3 donkeys that have lived out with cattle and never had their feet trimmed in 30 years. What I mean is talk to reputable breeders, talk to reputable trainers who, actually do good work and are known to work with the animal's welfare in mind. Talk to people who have been in the business for a long time. And don't get all of your information just from Facebook groups. I see a lot of misinformation out there, and people who say, well, my donkey was fine with XYZ. Well, maybe not. Maybe by your definition, I don't know. But that's my little soapbox there. But another soapbox. I have a lot of soapboxes. But really, really research. Really find out what your animals need, because, like I said, there's a lot of misinformation out there. When I first started getting into donkeys, there was a lot of information about how they were fine to be in with cattle. They would protect your herd. They would be fine on, a cow or goat diet. That, they were just super stubborn and just hard to train. There was a lot of misinformation out there that I came across. And I found since then that a lot of the things I was told weren't true. A lot of the things that are out there in the Facebook world definitely aren't true. So really, and even if you contact your local vet, oftentimes they've never been trained with donkeys. They've been trained with horses. And so they're extrapolating all of their information from what horses need. And so really researching and finding the people who can give you appropriate information before you adopt or buy is important. And then finding animals that make sense for you and your situation is important. Don't just pick up an animal that you feel sorry for. Pick up an animal that you can actually care for in terms of your funds, in terms of your experience, in terms of your living arrangements, what makes sense. Don't saddle yourself with something that you can't handle, that is now landing the animal in a potentially worse situation, not on purpose, but just because of ignorance. At that point, just really research. Do your research. It's hard when there's a lot of emotion involved, and you really want to help, but there's other ways to help. And I'm not sure how clear I'm making that message, but really putting yourself in the situation so that when you bring on an animal, you have the resources, the time, the commitment, and the ability to care for them properly, or really you're not doing that animal a good service. Does that make sense?
It sure does. It sure does. Yeah. It just occurred to me, I'm sorry, I'm going a little sideways, but in that research, finding, like you said, a veterinarian who can work with your donkeys, a farrier who is willing to work with donkeys, because a lot of them have been put off in the past by, poorly trained donkeys.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And not all horse farriers know how to trim donkeys properly. They need to be trimmed a little differently. And not all horse farriers are going to understand that some donkeys might need to be worked with a little differently as well. I'm really lucky where I am, that I'm right near CSU Vet Hospital. So there are like a bazillion vets to choose from. I'm lucky that, we have several farriers in the area that are really donkey knowledgeable. But if you live somewhere where you don't have those resources, that's really tough. It can be nearly impossible to find those resources that you need. That being said, it's your responsibility to train your animal. And so if your donkey is really hard to handle with their feet, it's not your farrier's responsibility to do that. And keeping a good farrier, keeping a good veterinarian means you need to put the time into that animal appropriately to train them for that. And that's where we go back to, did you get an animal that really is appropriate for you and for your skills? And can you actually manage that and learn how to handle them properly? Because if you can't, then now you're in a pickle. And it's not your farrier or your vet's fault that you're not getting them out there because they're afraid for their life. These people rely on their bodies to work. And so just like any of us, they don't want to get hurt. So that's why I think that the education is so important for the donkey owners to be able to handle their animals well, so they can get that vet care, so they can get that farrier care. But if you can't find resources in your area, there are resources for training courses to trim your own animals. And in terms of vet care, a lot of times you might actually have to start contacting veterinarians that are donkey specific in other areas of the country and having them consult with your veterinarian to understand, how to treat your donkey properly. So I understand that's a struggle. And that's why that education worldwide is so important, because even in the veterinarian world, it's hard to find people who really have dedicated any time to working with donkeys. So it is a struggle. It's definitely something I'm hoping to help improve in my own way if I can.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel Ann. This has been terrific, and I am going to go order your book as soon as I finish here. Put that little plug in for you guys. It's fascinating work, and I just really want to keep learning more. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, you guys. It's been really fun, and I'm really just hoping that over time, more people will be stepping up. There's some really knowledgeable people in the donkey world that they're so busy working with their donkeys, they don't have time to do the educational piece. And it is a struggle. That's the adult struggle, right? There's so many things to do and not enough time to do it all. And I wish that food was free so I could just work on this or whatever I want to at the time. But but I would really encourage other really knowledgeable donkey people to step up and start doing some educational work in their field, because I think it's so needed. I mean, like I'm writing these books because it's something that's needed, but I'd love for other professionals to step up and do more as well. And that way we have more of a wealth of information, and more access to information all over the world would be fantastic. So
Yeah.
That's my little plug for everybody else. Step up and do it if you can. If there's any way, in whatever way you can, to help educate people, do it, because it's so needed. It really is.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great message, and thanks again for being with us to share that. Brittany, any follow-up questions or?
No, we're going to kind of wrap things up. Final plugs. Check out Rachel's books. The first one is Starting the Saddle Donkey. And then the second one that's about to come out would be Starting the Donkey from Scratch, Wild to Mild. And you can find both of those on the Rachel's website. That's hee-haw-halfwayhouse.com. So please go there, check out all these amazing resources, learn more. And what was your Facebook again? It was at Hee-haw Halfway House.
It's Hee-haw Halfway House Donkey Rescue and Education.
It
used to be Foghorn Farm Donkey Training. So there's a lot of people who are on that page as well. And I'm trying to move everybody over to the other one, because I've moved more into the education and rescue than just simply training. So I'm attempting to move the horde over. You're slow to catch on to that. So I'm like, come on.
It's hard. It's hard to get people to switch over, just one of those things. People are like, no, this is how it's always been. I don't need to change things. So it's not just, I have so many things to say about social, but that's for another day.
It's definitely an interesting world to live in with the social media aspect, but I feel like it's such a great tool if you can get in there and really work with it. So it's an ever evolving process, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. So yes, go check out Rachel's resources, please. While you're there, you can also check out our resources. We have livestockconservancy.org. We have lots of information about rare and endangered donkeys. That includes miniature donkeys, mammoth jackstock donkeys, and the amazing Poitou donkeys. So please go and look at those. A big thank you to ManaPro again for sponsoring Donkey Chats today. Thank you. And then thank you to all of our members and supporters. We appreciate you. You help make educational programming possible. You help make it possible for small farmers to raise these endangered breeds. So thank you. If you're not a member and you want to become one, you can go to our website. That's livestockconservancy.org, and you can become a member and supporter. You can become a monthly subscriber, and for $4 a month, you can help support small farmers. And small farmers, small trainers, small everything. Am I forgetting anything, Charlene?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really appreciate it. And thank you to anyone who's watching. And hopefully I'll be seeing you out in the Facebook universe or wherever you can contact. And just happy to be out there doing what I do. So
absolutely. Well, thank you again, Rachel. This was amazing. Such a great chat. I'm so glad we got to talk with you today. We're celebrating goats next month. So if anybody's interested in goats, please join us again next week. Next week, we're talking about Spanish goats. So that will be a lot of fun. Oh, Regina just left us an amazing comment. Hi, Regina. She says it's easier to train a donkey or to train people to switch Facebook page.
I feel like that's probably true. I've told a few people that the donkeys outsmart me most of the time, and I'm just trying to catch up. And yes, it's definitely easier to work with donkeys than humans. I totally agree.
Thank you for that. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon and a great week, and we'll see you back soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.